Wonderful. So, welcome everybody to the second in the series of my nature writing hours. I know many of you, but if there's anybody who is new today, I'm Amanda Tuke. I'm a freelance nature writer, and I'm a very keen botanist and bird watcher living in suburban South London. For the session itself, just some housekeeping things. If I could ask you to please stay muted during the writing exercises, just so everybody else can concentrate, that would be brilliant. And if you did have any questions about the exercises, just pop them in the chat and I'll keep an eye on that and answer them for you if I can, if they're not too difficult questions. We are going to have a couple of discussion points in the session today. So all I would ask is that you either wave at me or put your hand up. When we do the discussions, I'm going to do my best to pause the recording at that point, so you could reappear if you wanted to. Yeah, so put your hands up and be reasonably brief, just so that there's time for anybody who does want to contribute to do that. That would be brilliant. And just lastly, the live transcription is turned on, so if that would help you, then you should be able to access that from your menu on the screen. So, with no further ado, let's have a little run through what we're planning to do today. It's very similar to the first session in terms of what we'll be doing, but for those of you who weren't here 3 weeks ago, we're going to do 3 writing exercises leading to ultimately a 50-word piece of what I call thumbnail nature writing. So that's just a way of sort of encapsulating a bit of experience about nature, but in a very short piece, sort of ultra short piece. I'm going to share with you some readings, the nature writing readings, which fit with the theme, today's theme, of nature, writing and you. So they're pieces of writing which feature the writer actually in them. We're going to have a discussion about the focus for today, so I'd like to hear your views on a nature writing debate. There'll be some takeaways at the end, so things that you can carry on, choose to do afterwards, and then we should have time for a bit of sharing if anybody would like to share anything they've written during the session today. So it's a lot to pack in, but I'm going to try and keep it very calm and relaxed, so it shouldn't feel stressful for you at all. It's supposed to be a lovely Saturday morning thing to do, a bit like doing yoga, but better. Right, so the first exercise, there's no reason not to get straight in there. So knowing who you are as a nature writer, which I'm going to call your unique nature perspective, your UNP, is a really useful thing to think about, and this is a bit of a fun exercise. If you did one of my very first workshops way back when, a couple of years ago, you might have done this before, the lip smacking exercise. If you're around my age, if you're in your 50s, you might remember the Pepsi Cola advert, which started off with lip smacking, and it was just a whole load of hyphenated words. So the idea in this warm-up is to write a description of you as a nature writer. So the final words of it should be nature writer. And I've just done a quick example for me at the bottom of the slide. So I'm a plant-loving, bird-tracking, teenage wrangling, folk music playing, train-taking, adventure-seeking, pomposity-intolerant, talk-too-muching nature writer who laughs a lot at her own jokes. So that's me. So what I want to hear is who you are as a nature writer. So try and keep it positive. This is not about all the things you can't do and don't know about. Think about what's unique to you and get down some of that. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes to do that. And I'll give you a 1-minute warning before we finish. Over to you. Okay, you've got a minute left. So I'm going to ask you to pause there. So obviously with an exercise like this, the final result is less important than the process of thinking about it. So it's I guess what I'm trying to get to today is thinking about how what you bring to your creative writing, whatever sort of creative writing it is unique, and you can build on that. And that's what makes your writing different from other people's, because it would be incredibly dull if all nature writers wrote in exactly the same way. So you bring your personality, you bring your experiences, you bring any things that are difficult in your life, you bring your family life potentially to your writing when you do it. And those can be all positive things and make your writing have a unique voice that works for you. So what I wanted to share with you is some writing from some quite different writing from a range of people, and in there are different ways that you can use your unique nature perspective in your writing. So it could simply be the tone that you write in. So you might feel that you want to write very seriously and with great weight about difficult nature issues, or you might be more, you might approach things in a more humorous way, or other sorts of tone. And then the other way, or at least one of the other ways you can do it, is what I've called self-featuring, which is not a real thing, but so basically putting yourself in your writing so you are part of the subject. And that can work well, particularly if you're trying to show how you relate to nature. So these are some examples here of the different ways that people use tone, or different sorts of tone, and different ways people feature in their own writing. Now, the two top writers, I have to confess straight away, these are two writers who I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with. So Robert Macfarlane and Henry David Thoreau. So obviously Robert Macfarlane's still alive. Henry David Thoreau is more of a historical American writer. And the reason I do is because I find a lot of their writing overly earnest. I feel that they take themselves very seriously, and certainly Robert Macfarlane did in his earlier books. In The Wild Places is one of those earlier books. But what I deliberately did for this was I went through them and I was looking for humour, because they both do use humour as a way to break up their writing. And so I found some sections of the writing where they've done that. So I'm just going to read the Robert Macfarlane one, because we've probably not got time to do both of them. But I just wanted to share that Thoreau one with you. So this is the Robert Macfarlane piece. I had found that if I set my back against the trunk and put my feet on either tine of the fork, I could stay comfortable there. If I remained still for a few minutes, people out walking would pass underneath without noticing me. People don't generally expect to see men in trees. If I remained still for longer, the birds would return. Birds don't generally expect to see men in trees either. And so that's one of the small bits in the book The Wild Places, which I have read lots of times, and there's loads to recommend it. But I really like that piece because you get a bit of his personality in there. He's making fun of himself a little bit about the idea of being a grown man in a tree. So the next piece I wanted to share with you is from Ginny Reddy's Wonderland. So Ginny Reddy, I also really enjoyed reading Wonderland. Sometimes I get frustrated with her because she can be quite vague about nature. And those of you who did the session 3 weeks ago, we talked about whether it was important to name things. And Ginny Reddy famously refers to a bird of prey at several points in this book without ever seeming to show any interest in what the bird of prey was. And that's, you know, that's a matter of taste. My preference would be to have found out eventually what this bird of prey was. Anyway, so here she is on Wildflower Meadows. The Wildflower Meadows are something. The colours are so vivid. The violets and the purples and yellows and the oranges. And now and again I feel a heady rush, as if the colours have been injected directly into my veins. Later, Caroline reads me a list of some of the flower names. Bird's foot trefoil, violets, speedwell, red campion. The big blue spiky ones are viper's bugloss that grow everywhere on the farm. The plants sound as if they've been plucked from the pages of a fantasy novel, or are the ingredients in a spell, or part of an incantation. So I think that's a really nice piece of the book. I love the injected directly into my veins. Something, I don't know, it just feels very visceral, and you have that real sense of what she was looking at and the joy she had in the colours of those flowers. So something quite different again. Karen Christian is a friend of mine who suffers from tinnitus, and she writes a blog called Hush, which is all about, as it says there, searching for quiet in a world full of noise. And she writes a lot about nature and the sounds of nature, but this is just a bit of a fun piece that she wrote about birds. Shag me, shag me, shag me. After weeks of hearing a great tit scream this from the tree outside my bedroom, I was ready to sign him up to Bird Tinder. Okay, so I'm not a bird whisperer, and he might have been saying, "Boy lazy, the feeder's empty." But it was that time of year when the birds all get a bit frisky and their calls a bit louder, and this poor fellow really did seem to be missing out on all the action. So her pieces are often a bit cheeky like that, and sort of sometimes write the unthinkable. I like that. I think it's kind of fun, and it very much expresses her personality. She's lovely, and lots of fun to read. So if you enjoyed that, Hush is a really good blog to follow, so I encourage you to follow that. Okay, so obviously some of the reasons that I react to those pieces as I do is because of the kind of writer I am. So I'll write my preference. So I just wanted to include a piece by me. I'm not putting myself alongside Robert Macfarlane and Thoreau and Ginny Reddy, but just I wanted to share with you a piece that I had published quite recently, and it was talking about visiting Leeds with my son, who was considering going to Leeds University, and how you might squeeze in some bird watching while you're visiting on a city visit. So I think it's there, I say with glee, but my fledgling's sceptical. As we approach, it becomes increasingly clear that I'm in luck, and this isn't a pigeon tease. I don't believe in omens, but if I did, this would surely count as an auspicious one. The road is streaming with achingly cool young people, and I'm surprised that he's not embarrassed to be with a middle-aged woman staring through binoculars. He even asks to have a look too. "Pretty sure it's a mallard, Mum," he says with a poker face. Very funny. And just to reassure you, if I ever write about my family, I always share it with them first before I send it to the editor, because I have this awful horror of them reading it afterwards and being really annoyed with me. So, he was happy with that. So those are quite different approaches in terms of tone, the way they've written about nature, all the writers have written about nature, and the way they have inserted themselves into those pieces. And those are the things that we're going to think about next. So for exercise 2, what I asked you to do as a pre-workshop activity was to find 2 pieces of nature writing, one that you loved and one that you weren't so keen on, and to think about a nature moment that you've experienced and that you would like to write about. So if you didn't manage to do those things, that's absolutely fine. You probably have a sense already of what sort of writing you like and what you're not so keen on. And I'm sure that you can think of a nature moment just for the purpose of the exercise. So don't worry too much about what you're choosing. It's more about what you're going to think about as you're doing it. So as you write up to 100 words, about your nature moment, I want you to consciously think about those 2 aspects, the tone and how you self-feature in your piece. So we're going to have about, let's see what time it is. Okay, we're doing well, so we will have 10 minutes to do that, and I will give you a 1-minute warning, and if you have any questions, do pop those in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. So over to you. You have a minute left. Okay, I'm going to ask you to stop there. I know it's painful pulling yourself out when you're in the middle of a sentence. Let's give you a moment to do that. Fab. Okay, so before we move, let's move on to the next slide. So, something to think about, because this session is all about personal preference and taste. You will have quite different experiences and get different things from reading pieces, some of which are more literal and with less of the writer in them, and some of which have more of the writer in them. So these are just two pieces that so the second one is a piece from something I wrote, and I've just did a different version of it. So I guess what I'm interested in hearing from you is the difference between reading these two things. So, three gooseanders, two males and a female, with sleek silhouettes and hooked bills, are swimming in the river on the far side of the railway bridge in central Leeds. So that's the very literal one. And then secondly, on the far side of the railway bridge, I'm delighted to be greeted by a threesome of gooseanders, two males and a female, their sleek silhouettes and hooked bills unmistakable. Bradford-based nature writer Richard Smythe describes these residents of central Leeds as a midweek treat, warranting a modest ooh. For a London suburban birder, they're more of a yay. So, and it's a question, isn't it? Can nature writing have too much of you in it? Before I open that up to you all, I'm just going to pause the recording. You have a minute left. Okay. It's mean, isn't it? But I'm going to stop you there. So, well, we've squeezed a lot of writing in today into a short period of time. So what I'm gonna do is do the sort of finishing up the formal bit to start off with, so that we can leave some time at the end to hopefully hear from you. So what have we been talking about today? So it's my usual tips for compelling nature writing to add to all of the other tips I've shared with you in the past. I think that having a clear sense of who you are as a nature writer and thinking about the kind of writing which appeals to you can really help with finding a writing tone that you're comfortable with, and therefore your voice as a nature writer. Writing yourself into your work can be engaging as the reader learns about you too, but be mindful of balance, and we've talked a lot about that. Preference, personal preference. Your writing, depending on how much of yourself you put in, your writing will appeal to some people more than others, and hopefully as many people as possible. So as writers, that's what we're always trying to do, isn't it? Is to share our personal experience to make it as generally engaging as possible. And then, as I always say, so whenever I write feature articles, when I worked out the time that I spent actually doing the writing and the research bit of it, that kind of first, as you were doing in exercise 2, that's about a third of my time, and then I spend twice as much time as that then editing it and polishing it, because obviously as a writer I want to be able to convince the editor to keep accepting my work, so they need to know it's going to come fully formed, professional, typo free, all of those things, and meet the word requirements and the topic requirements. So I think that's a generally good rule of thumb for how much time you spend polishing. And on that note, as I always do, if you could please give your 50 words, including title, Katie. Yeah, it is. Sorry, I should have said that more clearly at the start. Give it a final polish, just for your own satisfaction as much as anything else. And it really is worth sleeping on it and having a look at it tomorrow. There's something about the next day, looks completely different. And if you'd like your thumbnail piece on the theme of nature and me to be considered for inclusion in an online anthology on my blog, do please email it to me by the end of this weekend, and that's the email address there. And if you had any photos relating to the piece you've written that you'd like me to consider, I will do that too. I'd also say, if you enjoyed doing the lip smacking exercise and you've got something from that you'd like to share, send that in as well, and I'll try and squeeze in as many as possible. And if you haven't had a chance to look at the last anthology, that's already up on the blog. It looked lovely. Some great writing in there, and I'm just, as usual, I was amazed by what people can produce in such a short space of time. So I really enjoyed reading them, and I've had lovely feedback from other people I've shared it with. So if you don't feel ready to do that, and you're not quite in a place where you want your stuff to go public, as it were, do at least share your thumbnail nature piece with one other person, and then we can build on that. But don't just keep it to yourself. It's really worth getting somebody you trust to tell you what they think. And it's just, as a writer, your audience is super important. We've been talking a lot about audience today. So before we finish, a little bit of time, and I'm hoping to persuade some of you to show. Right, I'm just going to pause the